Tech giant Atlassian will encourage its 3,500 employees to take part in this month's global strike for climate action, in a move it hopes will reverberate through corporate Australia. The firm's billionaire co-founder, Mike Cannon-Brookes, said companies had to take their share of responsibility for the climate crisis and warned Australians in particular could not rely on governments at all to address the problem. In an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, he said prominent politicians such as Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton, who has been critical of corporate activism in the past, should stick to their knitting, something Mr. Dutton has previously told chief executives to do. Millions are expected to walk out of workers' school on September 20 as part of Strike for Climate Action, inspired by 16-year-old Swedish schoolgirl and activist Greta Thunberg, to demand global action on climate change ahead of a major United Nations summit in New York the following week. A dozen other firms will support staff who wish to take part in the strike, including fossil-free superannuation fund Future Super, which will shut its doors on the day, and reusable coffee cup company Keep Cup. Atlassian employees can use part of the week's leave they receive each year to do charity work. Mr. Cannon-Brookes said Australia had no credible climate policy whatsoever, noting carbon emissions continue to rise despite the Morrison government's insistence it will meet its 2030 targets under the Global Paris Agreement. Politicians can try to put whatever spin on it they want, he said, referring to Energy and Emissions Reduction Minister Angus Taylor's recent explanation that emissions increases were due to growth in liquefied natural gas exports. Mr. Taylor in June said the figures did not acknowledge Australia's contribution to lowering emissions in other countries through exports of LNG, which creates fewer emissions than coal. I was very amused by the spin that absent that the increase in LNG exports emissions would have gone down, Mr. Cannon-Brookes said. Coalition ministers have previously criticized student climate strikes and corporate activism. Resources Minister Matt Canavan warned striking students would only learn how to join the dole queue, while Mr. Dutton said it was unacceptable that people would use companies and the money of publicly listed companies to throw their weight around. But Mr. Cannon-Brookes said, as corporations were directly affected by climate change, it was in their own capitalistic interests to encourage stronger political action. Corporations have to deal with it, they have to deal with their own impact and their own footprint as companies, he said. It's a crisis that demands leadership and action. But we can't rely on governments alone. Sadly, in Australia, we can't rely on them at all. But Mr. Cannon-Brookes rejected the idea of entering politics. I'm a little too honest for that. I'd be a rubbish politician, he said. In addition to supporting the strike, Atlassian will screen Damon Gameau's climate change documentary 2040 at its offices in Sydney, San Francisco and Austin.